Hoop Dreams, an American documentary film, premiered at the 1994 Sundance Film Festival, where it won the Audience Award for Best Documentary. It is the most recent documentary film to be nominated for the Academy Award for Best Film Editing. It received high critical and popular acclaim and grossed over $11 million worldwide. It is often considered by critics as one of the greatest documentary films of all time. When the makers of Hoop Dreams made a profitable deal for theatrical distribution, they faced a situation most documentary filmmakers can only dream of. The makers felt that it was necessary to share the profit with their subjects. Gordon Quinn and co-producer-co-director Steve James devised a complex profit-sharing scheme in which the two main characters, Aggie and William Gates, earned the royalty shares equal to those of the filmmakers. Additional shares went to the boys' family members and other principals, based on a formula figured by screen time. It was the right thing, and it was a lot of money. Quinn stresses, "It didn't make things easier for us. All of us are still struggling, but I don't think any of us had any regrets." So, in scenarios like this, where a documentary film becomes profitable, or when it is intended to be broadcasted on television, should the subjects whom stories are being told have a percentage of the profit? Is it ethically justified to compensate the subject?
One of the ethical dilemmas that comes up is, of course, that of payment. Sometimes you go into certain areas where people expect to be paid in order to let you film their story. Mm-hmm. Now, what that means is if they're willing to accept payment for something, they will also be willing to act and give you the story that you want, and that becomes an ethical problem. So when you actually start, looking at documentary properly, and especially when you're working for networks, again, like the likes of National Geographic or BBC or anyone, one of the first rules is that you will never pay anyone any money. Now, this works very well for developed countries, but when you go into very sort of poverty-stricken countries, that becomes slightly problematic because that is a transaction that everyone expects. I faced that when I was in Ghana working on a documentary on child slavery, and I think the only way I could get around it was, right, I'm not going to make any cash payments to anyone, but yes, I will provide food for the people that I'm featuring in the film, or once we're done with the filming, at the end, I can maybe buy clothes for a couple of people. And again, it is still an ethical issue because at the end of the day, that's something I did off the back of on my own rather than as part of the project. But the bigger issue is, yes, you're helping a couple of people because they were only part of your film, but there's a lot of other people, and what you do, does that really help the cause? What are you really doing to change things?
Conventional wisdom in journalism says don't pay, ever. Paying people to talk poisons what they say. Would you trust a New York Times article if you knew the reporter had paid the subject to talk? Paying compromises the subject and colors their intentions, or so the thinking goes. Subjects might end up telling the filmmakers what they think the filmmaker wants to hear. They may perform or act for filmmakers, and payment might directly affect the outcome of the reality the documentary is hoping to capture. Now, while the journalism profession has the SPJ Code of Ethics, which is not legally enforced but is a generally accepted guideline in the industry, there is nothing similar for documentary filmmaking. The reality of documentary filmmaking is not as simple as conventional wisdom. Documentary filmmakers has not yet settled with whether or not to compensate the subject in some way for their cooperation, for their time, for their materials. With more and more documentaries enjoying successful theatrical releases, the public's perception of non-fiction film seems to be changing, from hopelessly non-profit noble efforts to yet another opportunity to make money in the media landscape.
So generally speaking, and this is not just National Geographic Abu Dhabi, it's pretty much any network or any sort of news organization as a rule, you do not pay for production. And the bottom line is exactly that when you come in and offer any kind of monetary help, you in fact have the power to change the story, and that can work against you. So that's a very strict rule that you have to be very clear, and a lot of approvals have to go into place. If you feel that there is some, either you're taking up someone's time and they're really poor and therefore there needs to be some sort of a compensation, then this is something that requires a lot of conversation, a lot of discussion with the entire team, and then you decide whether that payment is going to work in that sense. But it's never sort of, you might find like people come to you and say, yeah, well, I'm willing to let you into my life and give you an interview, but pay me. No, it's not it doesn't work like that.
And on this ground, many varies. Some strongly uphold by a no payment code. Michael Rosenblum, for example, executive producer of TV short documentaries like Turning the Tide, states that if you are a documentary filmmaker, you never pay anyone for participation. A documentary takes us into the world of journalism, and journalism has certain rules and standards. One of these rules is you never pay people to participate. Paying them changes the nature of the relationship. If you pay them, they are working for you, and as your employees, it is their job to do what you want them to do. As soon as that becomes the nature of the relationship, the faith that the viewer has that everything you see is absolutely true is shattered. If these people are working for you, if they are now in fact actors in your film, how can I know that what I'm seeing is real? It's the same reason we actively discourage directing in documentaries and news. It destroys the trust the viewer has in the film, and it destroys the trust that people have in the entire genre of documentary films. Sometimes people will indeed ask you for money before they will participate. If they do, walk away, find someone else.
What we would do is we negotiate. We push, we try and explain to them that, look, we are coming here to tell your story. We are not allowed to pay you. And I think this is something that's a conversation as well. We cannot pay. And if it means walking away from a story sometimes, you do have to walk away from the story.
And on the other hand, Ricardo Guana, director of the film Barak Central, now funding Kickstarter, which follows children who work in a park in Antigua, Guatemala, states, paying people is okay. Look, you aren't a journalist. You are making a film. People always talk about journalistic ethics when it comes to paying people. And frankly, while that's extremely important in journalism, that doesn't work for me here. I have moral problem working with people who are losing money when they are working with us, and not paying them while I am making something that potentially could generate revenue. Pay people. What they are doing is work, no matter which way you shake it. They are working, and believe it or not, you might actually help them get a little out of the hole in the long run. Just don't start paying subjects to do things that are dishonest. That's when you start violating an ethical line. There are numerous definitions of ethics, which vary depending on which ethical theory is applied. Aristotelian ethics, or virtue ethics, focuses on the inner qualities of a person, or in this context, a filmmaker, that determine the way he or she deals with ethical dilemmas. From the Kantian perspective, an honest and truthful process is the most important. Consequentialism theory emphasizes the final product, and from this perspective, some ethical compromises can be justified if the final product benefits the audience.
With ethics, it's the money part of it is a big one that I've is a lot of times I have filmed in countries where either your heart goes out to the store and you say, well, what can I do here, and the only way I've kind of where on the spectrum of ethics this lies, but my personal thing was, once I'm done with the shoot, once I'm done with everything, at the end of everything, off my own kind of out of my own pocket, I might give something or do a little something, but that's got nothing to do with the production, right? It's also like at this point I'm like, I have the story that I needed, You know what I mean? I'm not going to need these guys anymore. I don't need anything from that Amir, so I think I can justify it. But these are very much my own project, not the project that I've done for Networks, you know. So, and again, there's such nominal amounts that, you know, and most of the time you say, right, rather than cash, do clothes, do food, because at least it's not, you know, something that can be used negatively.
Despite this difficult ethical problem, an ethical solution using the framework of Emmanuel Levian's can be formed. By encountering the other, that we are constituted as an individual, and that ethics is a questioning stance, a critique of those ways of thinking that determine our attitudes to others. Levian's work is based on the ethics of the other, or in Levian's terms, on ethics as first philosophy. For Levian's, the other is not knowable and cannot be made into an object of the self, as is done by traditional metaphysics. Levian's prefers to think of philosophy as the wisdom of love, rather than the love of wisdom. In his views, responsibility towards the other precedes any objective searching after the truth. If documentary filmmakers find it necessary to pay a subject based on a face-to-face interactions, they should proceed to do so. Of course, documentary filmmakers affect the outcome, but they don't affect it that much if they do it skillfully. They can just incorporate it into the film, so audience understand. They should not intervene just because they want the story to come out a certain way. They must be aware that certain things they do may affect the subjects. And it's the same with journalism. There is no way to remain pure. If the filmmakers see the need, they should not ignore it. They can pay for the subject's electricity bill, their food, or to hand out money if the necessity called. Because after all, this encounter is more important than the film. These are personal interactions. Just because they're documentary filmmakers doesn't mean they're not human.